Ever since I was a child growing up by the rice paddies of Indonesia, I've known what it feels like to be an outsider. Born into a missionary family, I learned early on what it's like being a stranger in a foreign land, and I identified with other outsiders that I met along the way. But in every place I lived, the table has always been a place of welcome. It's a place where people slow down, let down their guards, tell stories, and connect. When I'm seated at a table with steaming food and diverse people around me, I feel more alive than any other place. It wasn't until later in life that I realized this transforming effect of the table, this deep sense of home and belonging I felt, was an experience of hospitality and part of a bigger story, the Christian story. It was the story of God welcoming humanity into God's love and kingdom family, and then urging those welcomed to pay it forward, to extend the welcome they received to others. I learned that the culminating story in Scripture is of a great heavenly wedding feast, where God and God's people from every tribe and nation will gather around an exquisite banquet table. The more I studied, I also came to realize that Christian hospitality is much more than having friends over for dinner. Hospitality in Greek is philoxenia, literally love of the stranger. And that's what it meant in the ancient world, loving or taking responsibility for the well-being of a stranger. God instructed the Hebrew people to remember what it felt like to be foreigners in Egypt and to deal justly with strangers in their own land. The early Christians, living as a persecuted minority within the Roman Empire, strongly identified with outsiders and were well respected for how they cared for the vulnerable. And Jesus himself was very clear about loving the stranger in Matthew 25. He tells his disciples that when they serve the least of these, the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and the prisoner, they were in fact serving him in disguise. I began to wonder, what does it look like for an ordinary church to live this out? So I set out on a quest to find local churches and everyday Christians who were practicing radical hospitality and welcoming the strangers in their own communities, and doing it in a way that was sustainable for the long haul. Along the way, I discovered several churches all over North America living out this practice in ways that were beautiful and unique. I visited a Reformed church in the Midwest where the congregation was primarily composed of prisoners and ex-offenders. I visited a mega church in the Deep South where families adopt 2, 3, even 4 kids from their county's foster care system and international orphanages. I visited a parish church in a bustling city where very diverse people intentionally share neighborhood life together. I visited a mainline denominational church in an inner city that is serving and sharing life with its low-income neighbors and people of different races. And I visited a charismatic church in the Canadian Bible Belt where people with disabilities are a central pillar of the church. Even though these churches were unique in their size, denomination, location, and in the people that they welcomed, I saw 7 common threads that wove through their stories and seemed to be important for living and sustaining a radically welcoming congregation. First, radical welcome has to be modeled by the leadership and owned by the congregation. While it may seem obvious that buy-in from both church leadership and congregation is important, what is less obvious is how this culture of welcome comes about. Every welcoming congregation has a different story, yet arrives at the same place. For some churches, it starts with congregants who had a heart to reach out, and with time attracted a pastor who resonated with this vision. For others, it started with the church leadership and vision that in time attracted members with the same heart and mind. The point is that missional attracts missional. The only way to become a missional church is to start living missionally. As either the leadership or congregational members are faithful to welcome the strangers in their community, God often brings others who can share in this vision and work. Second, every church partnered with a bridge group that already has its hands and feet in the community. A striking feature of hospitable churches is that they partner with a group that's doing hands-on work with the people that the church welcomes. For some of the churches, this group was birthed from the congregation in order to meet their community's needs, and other churches partner with outside groups from the community. The Bridge group provides the context, deals with the details, and the church plays a supportive role. Third, radically hospitable churches invite new people into service and leadership from the get-go. As one pastor said, "Get in where you fit in." I noticed that welcoming churches believe everyone, no matter how rough, comes with gifts and talents that can benefit the larger body, and work hard to plug them in early on. Hospitable leadership is empowering for new people, cultivating a sense of acceptance and ownership and the dignity of being a valuable contributor. Fourth, welcoming congregations eat together. This one is simple and yet profound. Whether it's a bowl of soup or Sunday breakfast, eating together can break down barriers and provide an opportunity for people who are very different to connect each week as they share food together. Fifth, each church provided regular theological teaching and support to keep the vision fresh and alive. Vision has a very short shelf life. Congregations that successfully practice long-term hospitality consistently remind their congregants why reaching out and welcoming is important, even when it's difficult. In addition, there are often newcomers to bring into the church's vision and culture. This casting of vision happens through preaching and teaching that challenges people with God's heart for the least of these, and the importance of sharing the same welcome they've received from God. Congregants are also taught by example as they observe their pastors and lay leaders making space in their own busy lives for those that God sends their way. Perhaps the greatest source of encouragement is seeing transformed lives as those welcome grow more and more into wholeness and community. Sixth, hospitable congregations were ecumenical-minded and networked with a variety of groups. Each of these churches were open and welcoming not only to the stranger in their community, but also to partnering with the other churches, denomination, and local civic groups. They recognized that they needed as much help as possible from like-minded groups in their calling to kingdom work. Finally, each church had cultivated a space of grace. Creating a space of grace is fundamental to radical hospitality lasting in a congregation. Serving the least of these can be hard and discouraging work. Sustained hospitality requires congregations recognizing that worn-out leaders and church members need seasons where they can step away and rest. Also, grace needs to be extended to congregants who are not ready to live out hospitality, recognizing they may or may not grow into it. Lastly, it's vital that a congregation cultivate a space of non-judgment, where people who are still a little rough around the edges can come as they are and still be welcomed. It's in this space of grace that people experience belonging, God's love and healing, no matter what their background. These are some of the threads that form a radically welcoming and hospitable church. If you're wondering whether radical hospitality begins with you and your congregation, the answer is yes. To learn more about how you and your church can grow into a congregation practicing radical hospitality, visit radicalhospitalityfortherestofus.com.